So we talked about the last video, we talked about the Minnesota Timberwolves and all that. I know this is a hockey one, but I talked about the Timberwolves. Now we got to talk about their cousins, the Minnesota Wild, in this one. It's funny how, you randomly select teams to be put on a poll and then you just ask them what to do with the poll and then just write down and then just do it in a certain order. And, you get yourself. Maybe I'll just do like with hockey and basketball, it'll be like, well, we'll do one franchises thing, like the Clippers. The first one would be the Buffalo Braves, and then the team that Buffalo became, which was the LA Clippers and all that. But yeah, it's kind of weird how, the draw was made and all that. So we got pair of Minnesota things going on here and now. So let's talk about the Minnesota Wild and what was supposed to be one of their best seasons ever. And this was just in the early days. Hello out there, we're on the air. It's Cutter with a NHL time. Tensions blow, the whistle blown, and the pucks go down the ice. Some teams just want to win the cup and do it with a smile. Hey, that is cool. Up on the River Nile. Oh, the good old hockey game. Who will come out on top? Will a team get through the cup to the cup by any means necessary? Oh, the good old hockey game. It's the best game you can name, and I'm have no shame. I will simulate those hockey games. Woo! So anyway, the Minnesota Wild, their story begins with a team called the Minnesota North Stars, who, you know, was a great expansion team in 1967. The NHL had their six teams, and then they added six more to make things interesting, and then 12 teams facing each other. So it would be hard pressed to think that way. But yeah, the Minnesota Wild, well, the Minnesota North Stars were there, but they had ownership problems. They had to merge with the Cleveland Barons in 1978 and still become the Minnesota North Stars. Like they took all the Cleveland players for themselves. Then the North Stars practically had ownership issues by 1990, in which George and Gordon Gund, who were the owners, decided to move the team to San Jose, or so they thought. Unfortunately, the NHL said, no way, you got to keep the team in Minnesota. Find a buyer who buys the North Stars, and then we'll give you an expansion team. So they did. So the Guns got the San Jose Sharks, and San Jose / San Francisco was getting hockey back. So the Sharks were there, but the NHL in their wisdom said that the Sharks were allowed to take Minnesota players, from the big club and the um, minor league affiliates, and then the North Stars to replenish their roster would take players in the expansion draft alongside the San Jose Sharks. So the North Stars lost some players to the Sharks and all that, and then got to take part in the expansion draft, in which they picked up Guy Lafleur among others. But of course, they had to pick a guy from Quebec. So San Jose didn't have a guy they wanted from the Nordiques. Minnesota didn't think so either. But they took Guy Lafleur and then traded him back to Quebec for Alan Hallworth. So the Minnesota North Stars were a fun team to be around. And the funny thing was that expansion draft thing debacle happened in 91, just after they made the finals in the first place. Unfortunately, Norm Green decided to be greedy with the team and moved the North Stars to Dallas in 1993. So Dallas got the team, and Minnesota was about hockey. It was supposed to be for a little bit until 95 when the Jets were going to move to Minnesota. But unfortunately, Civic Pride saved the Jets from moving from Winnipeg. Minnesota would have to watch the Jets move to Phoenix, of all places. But fortunately, though, in 1997, they were told they would get an expansion team for the 2000 season. And that's what they did. So the 2000 season would see the Minnesota Wild and Columbus Blue Jackets start their NHL career. Minnesota would be big. They decided to retire the number one in honor of the fans and, bring the hockey back to the Twin Cities. They struggled at first. They didn't get Marion Gaborik in the draft, so no big deal. Minnesota, after 2003, which we will talk about, have been kind of off and on. They've had some great moments with Kirill Kaprizov. Kaprizov. Why am I struggling on his name? But anyway, yeah, Minnesota had some runs in the playoffs, but just couldn't get to the conference finals when they needed to. 2014, it was basically a deja vu moment when they took on the Colorado Avalanche in the first round. And again, Minnesota won in game 7 on the road in Denver. I actually predicted Minnesota would take care of Colorado because my Colorado seems to be a little underwhelming as the number one team in the division. So I'm like, Minnesota for sure is going to win. And let me hold that was right for once. So yeah, Minnesota has some movements. Marc-Andre Fleury winding down his career. Philip Gustafson trying to fill the void. Getting some players like Brett Burns, Zach Parise, where they overpaid those guys. Oh, they overpaid Ryan Sutter too. Minnesota was trying everything in their power to do well, but failed miserably. So logically, you know, that was that. And the Minnesota Wild are going to be there for the taking. So anyway, what would happen about the Minnesota Wild in one of their most successful seasons, which was very early in their career? Let's find out. So anyway, the 2003 Minnesota Wild, this was the third season in the NHL. They actually qualified for the playoffs, which was good. So anyway, in the regular season, Minnesota actually got shut out 10 times in games, but they still won 42 of them. They were sixth in the conference. Colorado won the division of the last day of the season to go third, and Vancouver fourth. Minnesota would take sixth. Edmonton would get in as the eighth seed with 92 points. So Dallas was number one, then Detroit, then Colorado, then Vancouver, St. Louis, Minnesota, Anaheim, and Edmonton. It was basically 8 teams in the West making it. Chicago was 13 points back in the playoffs, so there was no real playoff chase and all that. So anyway, they had a good October. They were 8-1-2. All that. They made the conference quarterfinals against Colorado. One game won. And then after 3 straight losses, they decided to dump Rulli, the goalie, and put Fernandez in the net. And it worked. Minnesota won 3-2. And then Richard Park scored the winning goal in game 6 in overtime, forced a game 7 the next night in Colorado. And then it was 3-3. And then Andrew Burnett came out of freaking nowhere. Deked out Patrick Waugh and put the puck in the net. And Steve Levy was shocked by it. But he was doing play for ESPN. And that was officially the last game Patrick Waugh played in, an overtime loss to Minnesota of all teams. So they would face the Vancouver Canucks, who actually did the same thing. They actually were down 3-1 to the Blues and came back to win. They lost game 1 in overtime, won game 2 in Vancouver, then lost the next 2 at home. Rollinson was back in net for game 5, 6, 7, which Minnesota romped Vancouver. Those games were not even close. So practically, the Minnesota Wild came back from 3-1 down for the second time within one season. And, that was just amazing what they could have done or what they have done in a sense. So, yeah, Vancouver got blown out. It was weird how Minnesota came back from 3-1 down in the first round. Then in the second round, they were down 3-1 and came back to win. And the Canucks were down 3-1 and then were up 3-1 and failed. In the Western Finals against fellow Cinderella Anaheim, everyone thought Minnesota was going to crush it. But Minnesota couldn't put the puck past Jay Shiger, even if they tried. Fernandez and Rollison were basically rotating and all that. The Ducks put 9 pucks past Minnesota goalie in 4 games. That's not half bad, but they could only put 1 puck past Jay Shiger in 4 games. That had to be heartbreaking and all that. The playoffs, Gabrick led in the postseason and the regular season points. Rollins and Fernandez were basically rotating goalies throughout the season and the playoffs. Jacques Lemaire did win the Jack Adams Award for Coach of the Year. Marion Gabrick went to the All-Star game. And Pierre-Marc Bouchard made his first game. So anyway, the Wild made some moves. They traded away Jamie McLennan to Calgary for a 9th-round pick. They got Cliff Running from Los Angeles for a 4th-round pick. And then they didn't really pick up anyone good. Well, Bill McCult from Ottawa. They lost Aaron Gavey to Toronto. They didn't lose anyone major. Yeah. So Dwayne Wilson and Manny Fernandez were the main goalies. They didn't need McClellan. In the 2002 draft, they picked up Pierre-Marc Bouchard from Chicoutimi, who was a pretty good player, number 96 in your programs. Josh Harding, a decent goalie, went in the 2nd round. And then Barry Brust from Spokane, Matt Foy from Merrimack in the 6th round. So yeah, so Minnesota did well with their moves and all that. Didn't make any money moves, but still went on to the conference finals, coming back from 3-1 down twice in a row. So what would happen if the Wild were actually successful in the conference finals in any shape or form and gone to the Stanley Cup finals? Let's find out. So, of course, the what if is what if the Wild actually did get to the Stanley Cup finals and beat Anaheim? They would take on the New Jersey Devils. I did have to react to my post right there, right now. Regardless of that, Minnesota would face New Jersey. Jacques Lemaire would face his former team, the team that he coached to the 95 Stanley Cup finals and inserted the neutral zone trap. So it would be weird for Lemaire to go back to New Jersey to face his former club in any shape or form. Anyway, game 1. Would see Minnesota somehow win in overtime. Sholtok, one of the victims of the locomotive air crash of 2011, scores to make it 1-0. Scott Niedermayer tied it at 1. Willie Mitchell got in trouble for high sticking, but James Dowd was upset and got his unsportsmanlike. In overtime, Devils had a penalty, but was killed off. But Ante Laxonen from Park and Walls made it 1-0 for the Minnesota Wild. Brad Bombardier and Brad Brown only played like a few minutes each. And Ken Danico only played a minute 27. Did they have to go formal? Just say Ken Danico. Wayne Wilson, Sergei Sorotok, and Ante Laxonen were 3 starts of the game. Rolly, the goalie, did his job against Brodeur. Game 2 saw the Wild lose 3-1 at home, in New Jersey. Scott Gomez and Patty Elias made it 2-0. Scott Stevens, Kitchener, made it 3-0. Pascal Dupuis made it 3-1. But that was it. Christian Berglund got hurt. Who cared about him? Stevens, Rollison, and Elias are your 3 stars. Yeah, Rolly, the goalie, pretty good. So 1-1. They said that Rollison can start game 3 at home. Was that a good move? It was a good move. Minnesota won in overtime. Pascal Dupuis made it 1-0. And then Friesen tied it at 1. Gianta made it 2-1. Wild made it 2-2. Pascal Dupuis. Langenbrunner. And then at 3:23 of the second overtime, or 23:23 of overtime, if you will, Ronning DeGalbrick to Pascal Dupuis, who scored the hat trick and the winning goal as Minnesota would be the miracle workers, winning 3-2. Dupuis, Ronning, and Rolly, the goalie, were your 3 stars of the day. Game 4, let's see. The Wild win 1-0 thanks to Richard Park's goal. But man, Rolly the goalie would be doing his job. So anyway, 1-0 Minnesota. Rolison, Berger, and Park are your three stars of the day. Man, Dwayne Rolison playing lights out. I guess they made him the goalie. Game five would see Minnesota again win 1-0 as Chuck Lemaire's trap beat New Jersey's trap and Andrew Burnett in the second period. So the Minnesota North Stars, the Minnesota Wild would win the Stanley Cup in 5 games. A lot of people thought they were going to replace Rolison. Dwayne Rollison played his heart out and in the final 2 games did not give up a goal to those pesky Devils. The Devils were badly outbeaten and all that. And all these guys. Rollison, Burnett, and Berger, your three stars. Dwayne Rollison, 44 shots against. So the Devils were shooting on Minnesota. But Rollison was not phased and won the game. So Rolly does his job. Berger did not do his job. But yeah, Minnesota would have won the Stanley Cup over the Devils, and somehow Rollison would have been a folk hero, just like J.S. Shiger. He definitely would have won the Conn Smythe. So something to think about. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.